Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and this is the 2019 iPad lineup. Now, as you can see, we have the 2018 iPad, the iPad mini, the iPad Air, and the iPad Pro. This is the 12.9-inch version. There is also an 11-inch version, but the only difference is the display. So really everything is identical. So we're going to cover these four. Now, starting off with the cheapest or least expensive iPad, it starts at $329, and from here you can go all the way up to $1,899 with the iPad Pro. And with the cheapest one, you've got 32 gigabytes of storage up to 1 terabyte of storage with the iPad Pro. So you have a very wide variety of different display sizes, as well as price and storage. Now, none of them have expandable storage, and all of them support the iPad Pencil, but only the iPad Pro supports the second-gen Pencil, whereas the 2018 iPad, the iPad Mini 5, the iPad Air 3, they all support the first-generation Pencil. So keep that in mind. So we'll set this over here for now. We'll talk about that later, as well as the second-generation Pencil for now. Now, each one of these, like I said, is a little bit different, and you've got a little bit of everything for every one. So starting with the 2018 iPad, we have the A10 Fusion processor. All of the others get the A12 processor, but the Pro gets a boost in the graphics department, so it has more powerful graphics. So as far as the processors are concerned, they're very, very similar, and there's actually not as big of a difference as you might think, and we'll check that out a little bit later. Now, as far as color availability, it's a little bit different for each one of them. I'll flip these over so you can see each one of these here, though. But we have space gray here, and for the 2018, the iPad Mini and iPad Air, we have the same color availability. So we have silver, space gray, and gold. Now the space gray can look a little bit different depending on the different device, but for the iPad Pro, we've only got two colors. There is no gold, there is just space gray and silver, and this is the space gray. Now each one of these does offer cellular connectivity, but none of these have that. I tend to find that it's better to use my iPhone for that connectivity and save the money, because each one of these will cost an additional $129 if you want to add cellular. You can tell that easily because they'll have a little plastic cutout on these to provide that cellular antenna, since the signals don't travel very well through aluminum. And each one of these is made of aluminum, so there is no difference as far as the build, but when it comes to the actual strength and rigidity, the iPad Pro has had some issues with bending. Now, I thankfully have not had that issue, but if you really wanted to, you could flex this. If you wanted to push a little bit, I'm applying incredibly light pressure, and it does flex. I don't know if you can see that, but that would be if you just throw this in a book bag, something like that. It's going to move just from books being on it. I'm probably applying a half a pound or less of pressure on this, and it will flex very easily. So keep that in mind, be aware of that. But when it comes to these iPads, these have been pretty robust, especially this design here with the 2018 iPad. This one seems to be incredibly durable and feels very rigid. Now let's flip these over and we'll talk about the displays. Now the displays on all of these are actually quite nice, but the 2018 iPad display is not as nice as the others. And part of that is due to its air gap here. So it's not a laminated display, but rather there's an air gap between the glass and the LCD underneath. So that makes it easier to repair. So if you had a broken piece of glass, you could change out the glass without trying to separate it from the LCD display. That becomes very, very difficult. But when it comes to the others, they are all laminated, so it looks like the icons are actually sitting on the display themselves. The resolutions of the display are all high enough that they are Retina displays, with them all being at 264 pixels per inch, with the exception of the iPad Mini, because it's a smaller display, having 326 pixels per inch. They all look really good, and you can't see the pixels unless you hold them up really close to your face. Now, aside from the iPad Mini, Air, and Pro having a laminated display, they also offer higher brightness. So with the iPad from 2018, if we turn the brightness all the way up, we'll do that on each one of these, this has 420 nits of brightness, whereas the Mini and the Air go to 500 nits of brightness, and the Pro will go all the way up to 600 nits of brightness. Now, I don't know if you can see it on camera, but it does kind of go from bright, brighter, brightest, going from left to right from the iPad from 2018 to the Mini, Air, and Pro on the right. Let me turn those back down. Now, aside from its brightness, the 2018 iPad also does not have an anti-reflective coating. It doesn't support the P3 wide color gamut, so it doesn't have as many colors, and it also does not have True Tone. And I would say that True Tone is one of those features that you'll either love or hate. I tend to turn it off if I want color accuracy. In fact, it's off on all of these displays, but if I turn it on, let's turn on True Tone, you'll see how it will actually shift on the display to look a little bit more paper white. So if I go to the same settings on the regular iPad, you'll see in the display, it still has sort of a bluish tint to it. Now, if I go into the settings on the Pro, the same thing here. So it kind of makes the whites look more paper white. And if you're into creativity, you want the colors to be super accurate, not necessarily match paper. So I tend to turn that off if I'm doing any creative work. Now, there is one more advantage of the Pro over the others when it comes to the display, and that's the 120 Hertz ProMotion. And what that means is it's super, super fast and smooth. So just scrolling like this, it's just much more smooth than it is on, say, an Air, the Mini, or the 2018 iPad. And it's really hard to see unless you see it in person. On a camera, this is at 60 frames per second. You may or may not be able to see this just going back and forth, but it is smoother, especially when scrolling, going through news. It does not make that big of a difference if you're watching video or anything like that, since that's at a pretty familiar or constant 24, 30, or 60 frames per second. So you're not really going to notice it there. Now, as I said before, they all have pencil support, so that's really nice, but you do have to pair it. So this one may be paired to one of these. I guess not. It may be dead. So if we have to, we can charge it through the lightning port on the top. So if we want to pair it with the Air, for example, we'll plug it in the bottom here. This is how you have to pair it on all of them. And these also support the Logitech Crayon, supposedly, as well. So you'll see it takes a moment to pair, and hopefully it's paired already. I'm not sure. Let's see. It's not. There we go. So now it's working on the iPad Air. Now, if I want to switch the pencil from this device to the Mini or the 2018 iPad, you kind of have to plug it in every single time and then use it that way. Now, they are pressure sensitive. There's no issues there. But when it comes to the new pencil is a little bit more expensive, but it pairs simply by clicking it to the side. Clicks it to the side, it also charges it wirelessly, and it works really well on the iPad Pro. So there is no plug on it. It just clicks to the side magnetically, starts charging, and then you're on your way. It works really well. It feels better than the original pencil. And if you're an artist, it's definitely going to be a lot nicer. You also have a double tap ability on it, where you're in certain apps, you can double tap the side of it and it will give it different functionality, whereas the original pencil does not have. So it is nicer. It is a little more expensive, but they did really think it through. And unfortunately, only the current Pro devices support it. But other than that, it's nice to have pencil support on all of them. They're equally fast across all these devices. So you're not going to see any lag even on the older iPad. Let me go into notes and show you. We're on the regular iPad now, and we can scribble on the screen. It's nice and fast. It's still going to be at about 60 frames per second. And unless I slowed it down, you wouldn't see this. So you can write as fast as you want or as slow as you want. This is kind of at a weird angle, but just writing and things like that seem to work fine. Again, if I write zollotech, it works just fine. And most people are not going to complain about how well the pencil works. In fact, I'd say it's the best stylus out there for creators for the most part. The palm rejection on all of these is good. And what that means is if you rest your palm on it, it's not going to affect it. So if I rest my palm here, I can still use the pencil. It realizes my palm's on the display and rejects it and just kind of ignores it. Now, other than that, each one of these has a really familiar, nice design, but you do get an advantage with the Pro that you don't get on the other devices. One of those is USB-C. Now, USB-C is kind of the future of connectivity. For some reason, Apple sees that as a Pro feature on the iPad Pro. But USB-C is on everything from Macs to, well, pretty much everything except for iPhones at this point and the older iPads. And it's really nice once we have a universal connector. It also allows for higher charging power so it can charge faster and will work with a MacBook charger if you'd like. You also get stereo speakers on the Pro, so that's an advantage, and they sound much louder, and it's really nice to watch content on a Pro device with stereo speakers. Of course, if you're using headphones, that makes no difference, but it is nice to have, just to have that ability. Now, when it comes to the cameras, they are a little bit different across all the devices. Now, for some people, this is going to be a big deal. For others, it's not. Let me flip them over here. We'll talk about the back first, and then we'll talk about the front camera. Now, when it comes to the cameras on the back, they're all very similar with the exception of the Pro. The iPad, the Mini, and the Air all have 8 megapixel cameras with an f2.4 aperture. They all do 1080p video recording as well, but on the Mini and the Air, they also have a wider color capture availability. It just means they can pick up more colors, but I don't know that you're going to notice the difference very much. So on the iPad Pro, that's where you're going to see the biggest difference, because the iPad Pro has a 12 megapixel f1.8 camera with True Tone flash and 4K video. Here's a quick sample of all 4 of them just to show you what the picture differences are and also some video differences. Now, the front-facing cameras do vary quite a bit between the devices. On the iPad, if I turn the camera on, you'll see the forward-facing camera in this video probably looks okay. It's going to be hard to tell here, but the photo and video is just mediocre and will work fine for FaceTime calls and just playing around. But you only get 720p video capture out of the front of that camera. On the Mini and the Air, it does improve a little bit. I'll show you on the Mini. The front-facing camera is a 7 megapixel camera with a 1080p video. So let me flip this around here, and again, you're probably not going to be able to see this in the video, but it is a little bit nicer and can record in higher resolution, so that part's nice as well. But on the Pro, we do still get a 7 megapixel camera, but it is a true depth camera, so that means it can use an emoji and things like that because it has Face ID. So let's go into the camera. We'll flip it around here, and it looks much better. Now, it still only captures 1080p, and it looks okay when it comes to video, but it's very grainy and things, and again, it's not a phenomenal camera, but it does allow for things like Animoji. So if you want to use things like Animoji, it will work just fine. If you like to use these, Animoji, Memoji, you can use your face for that. And then talking about using the forward-facing cameras, well, the iPad Pro has Face ID, and Face ID works really well on the Pro devices because it works just fine when it comes to whatever orientation the iPad's in. If it's sideways, it will work. It's not like the iPhone. It's never really an issue. If you cover your hand over it, it will tell you that your hand's over it, and it can't do the Face ID. It says camera covered, so you move your hand and it unlocks. It's very fast, and it works really well on the iPad. I was not a huge fan of it on the iPhone, but I am on the iPad. However, Touch ID works just fine on all of these. In fact, they're going to be very similar as far as speed is concerned. I guess I don't have my thumb registered. You'll see it's pretty close on all of them. For the most part, it's going to be fine for most people using an iPad. You'll unlock it once, use it for a while, and put it away. Now, in a moment, we'll talk about speed, but let's first talk about connectivity. And when it comes to connectivity, they are very similar with the exception of the iPad. The iPad itself only has Bluetooth 4.2. All the others have Bluetooth 5.0. But where they are very similar is Wi-Fi. They all support 802.11 ABG and N and AC. They also have simultaneous dual band 2.4 and 5 gigahertz, also HT80 with MIMO. So they're all pretty well equipped for Wi-Fi. It's just the Bluetooth where it's a little bit different. Maybe the sound quality on the AirPods 2 might be a little bit different since this supports Bluetooth 5.0 and the regular iPad only supports Bluetooth 4.2. I'm not sure if it will make a difference. It doesn't really seem to. Only an audiophile would be able to tell probably, but honestly, audiophiles are probably not using AirPods when they're doing serious work. One thing the Pro does not get that the rest of the iPads get is a headphone jack. Apple has decided to keep the headphone jack on the iPad, the Mini, and the Air, but apparently it's not a Pro feature because you can use a USB-C to 3.5 millimeter adapter, or you can just use AirPods or wireless headphones. Now, let's talk about speed between the four, because speed should be significantly different between them, but it's not as different as you might think. So let me close all the apps in the background. Now all of the apps are closed in the background. So if I double click here on the home button, you'll see there's nothing there, nothing on any of them running any apps whatsoever. Now the speed is quite good. Because we have a little bit slower processor on the original iPad design here, you may think it's a little bit slower, but let's do something like open a web browser. We'll open it here, and scrolling should be just fine. Of course, it's going to be a little bit smoother on the Pro, like I said. If we want to load a site, this is going to be a little bit tricky to do, but let's see if I can do this. Let's go ahead and I'll just tap these as fast as I can here. They're all going to load similarly fast, and you shouldn't have an issue there. Now, multitasking works just fine on all of them, so we'll open the App Store on all of them. And if we want to bring in another app, for example, let's go back in, bring in Safari. We'll do the same on all of them. It's a little bit tricky to get that gesture without it doing the behavior you're seeing there. With it closing the apps, let's do this. And of course, we can multitask on any of them. So it's going to work just fine. Well, we'll move that one along. There we go. And we can resize, no problems. On the regular iPad, you're still not going to see a speed issue there. Now we could do something like open a game. So we'll open Minecraft on all of them, and I'll just show you how quickly they load between them, because I think you'll be pretty surprised usually. The difference is not as big as you might think. So I'll open the game. We'll wait for it to load on the Mini. There we go. I'll hit play on all of them. Then I'm going to create new. Then I'm going to create new world. And this is the part where it matters the most, actually creating the world. Let me go ahead and tap these as fast as I can. We'll see what happens. And you'll see the Pro is actually a little bit slower sometimes. And let's see which one finishes first. The oldest iPad finishes first, or the slowest iPad. But the frame rates and everything should be fine. And some people have said that's due to the actual speed that the processor ramps up with. So when you're ramping up the processor to go to full speed to load something, it can take a little bit longer on the newer device. So gaming actually works fine no matter which one you have. And that doesn't matter which game it is. Now, before we take a look at how quickly each one of these can export 4K video in a timeline, let's go ahead and open the camera and just see how quickly they open. So we'll go here, here. And they're all going to be so fast, it's not going to make a difference. Now I have iMovie open, and I've loaded the same video to a timeline in iMovie. This is a 4K video that was recorded with an iPhone, and as you can see here, they all look the same. They're all 3 minutes and 46 seconds. They have a title on them, a transition, and they fade to black at the end. So what I'd like to do is see how quickly we can export each one of these. So we'll go ahead and hit done. I'm going to slide these over a little bit. I've brought in a stopwatch so we can see how quickly they export. I'm going to try and export all of these at the same time as far as exporting. So we'll see if we can do this. It might be a little tricky. Then I'll hit the stopwatch timer. So we'll do that, hit the stopwatch, and let's see how long this takes to export. Now, as you would expect, the iPad Pro did finish first, but what was a little unexpected is the 2018 iPad finished second, and then the iPad Mini and Air were third and fourth at about the same time. So many people think that just because it has a newer processor in it, it's much, much faster. In fact, it seems to be that it doesn't make that much of a difference unless you're on a Pro that has a much more powerful graphics processor. And that's really where the difference comes in when you're editing on a larger display. Otherwise, they're very negligible. So hopefully those things helped you decide which one to buy. The 2018 iPad is a great buy, especially if you can get it refurbished or on a deal. Oftentimes you can get it less than $300 in the United States. They use the older technology of the lightning cable, which isn't really old, it's just current, but not on the iPad Pro, but it uses the lightning cable and just is missing 2 speakers. Otherwise, this is a great buy if you just need a general purpose reading and drawing and even an editing machine. This will work just fine. You may not like the bezels on this, so you may want to go for something like the Air or the Pro if you really want a lot more power. But when it comes to the OS, they're all identical. There's not really any differences other than that 120 hertz display, the camera, and the speakers, and a little bit of speed. Also, when it comes to battery, they are all pretty much the same. They should all get you about 10 hours of battery life. Apple has made it so that the battery is similarly sized enough in the different devices to handle the different displays at pretty much the same exact battery life. So that shouldn't even be a factor here because they're going to be the same for the most part. Other than that, that's really all there is for the iPads. The original iPad style, there's going to be more accessories that are less expensive, so you've got that as well. And they all work with smart covers. However, the iPad Air and the iPad Pro do have keyboard accessories because they do have a smart connector on the side. So there's 3 little dots or pogo pin connectors here. And on the back of the iPad Pro, we have the same thing. So if you're using a keyboard, you can use a keyboard or a keyboard case, but even if you don't want to use that, you can use a Bluetooth keyboard, which is usually less expensive, and then just get the case you'd like. So I don't necessarily consider those factors in purchasing an iPad, rather just that it's a bonus and has that capability. So we have the case here. You'll see this is the keyboard case for the iPad Pro, and it works fine, but it's not recommended necessarily because it's so expensive. It does work well, but it only goes at 2 angles, so you may want to try something else. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Which one would you pick up and why? And also I'll link this wallpaper in the description as I always do. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe and like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.